11 million victims, 6 million Jews and 5 million other minority groups who were considered undesirable were brutally murdered at the hands of the Nazis and those who refused to take action. When defining the word perpetrator, people tend to think about those who are physically inflicting pain and damage onto the victims. However, perpetrators can also be those who sit idly by while victims around them are being murdered. In the case of the Holocaust, bystanders were guilty of allowing these atrocious actions to take place. Yet, there were a few brave souls who stood up in the face of adversity, risking their lives to save others, known as Rightous among the nations. The Nazi Party rose to power during the 1930s when Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. Consequently, events such as the Reichstag Fire, Enabling Act, and the Nuremberg Laws followed, creating an undemocratic and hostile environment for the Jews, Roma, Sinti, those deemed disabled, communists, and many other victims considered asocials or undesirable by the Nazis. After the routinization and normalization of Nazism in Germany, Hitler began to enact aggressive foreign policies which led to the annexation of Austria in 1938, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and most notably the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which created an alliance between Germany and the Soviet Union and partitioned Poland at the beginning of World War II. The Kristallnacht pogrom, which occurred in Germany in November 1938, destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, synagogues, and much more. Thousands upon thousands of Jewish men were sent to labor camps and killing centers, which cost the Jewish community hundreds of millions of dollars. Following Hitler's invasion of Poland, the Soviet Union in June 1941, killing centers were created in all occupied Nazi territories, turning a hostile environment into a deadly one for its victims. All of these events took place over 10 years, allowing Hitler the time necessary to spark a genocide that would destroy millions of lives. Hitler managed to produce an environment of open aggression across all of these countries with the consent of the German people. Bystander countries such as the United States, England, and France allowed Hitler to do as he pleased without any repercussions, and did nothing to intervene until it was too late and the genocide had already begun. However, in the midst of all of this darkness, it is important to note that there were those who risked their lives for the preservation of humanity. Oskar Schindler and Jan and Antonina Zabinski are only a few examples of over 30,000 people across the world who risked their lives to save Jewish victims. These courageous non-Jews are known as the righteous among the nations, a term created by the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel called Yad Vashem, meaning a memorial and a name. It is crucial to honor and remember the actions of the righteous among the nations, for we all must be able to do the same and aid our fellow neighbors, friends, and human beings when faced with cruelties and inhumanity.
Oskar Schindler was a German Catholic middle-class entrepreneur who lived in the Sudetenland during his childhood. In 1938, the Sudetenland was annexed by Nazi Germany, and Schindler joined the Nazi Party for business opportunities in the war industry. In September 1939, Schindler moved to Krakow in Nazi-occupied Poland, seeing it as a city of new opportunities for an Aryan man like himself. A month later, Schindler took over a factory located just outside of Krakow in a small town called Zabloce. This factory had previously been owned by a Jew. However, it was confiscated by the Nazis following the German invasion of Poland. 3 years later, in 1942, Schindler's metal and ammunitions factory was quite successful, with over 45,000 square meters and 800 workers, 370 of them being Jews from the Krakow ghetto. What began as a simple business venture turned into a rescue operation of thousands of Polish Jewish men, women, and children. Being an Aryan man, Schindler was not initially exposed to the horrific actions of the Nazis and the ways in which the victims were being murdered. When he moved to Krakow, he saw with his own eyes the cruelties of the Krakow ghetto and the pain and suffering of the Jews. Because of this, he used his influence and power to save as many Jews as he possibly could. Due to his influence and contributions to the war industry, he prevented the transport of all of his workers to Auschwitz, a labor camp and killing center west of Krakow. He argued that their labor was necessary in order to win the World War. However, the Nazis saw his employment of Jews as him being a sympathizer, resulting in several arrests. Being labeled as a Jew sympathizer was a crime punishable by death. Even knowing this, Schindler continued to save Jews under the guise of necessary labor. In 1943, the Krakow ghetto was liquidated, meaning the ghetto is destroyed and burned to the ground along with many Jews' lives to enact the new order of the immediate extermination of all Jews residing in the general government, which is a Nazi territory in occupied Poland. The remaining survivors were sent to a labor camp nearby called Plaszow Labor Camp to await transportation. 20,000 of them were sent to Auschwitz, where the gas chambers awaited them. When news of this reached Schindler, he convinced the commanders at Auschwitz to supply him with 800 men and 300 women, a majority of whom were Polish Jews. Another known rescue mission occurred in 1945 when Soviet military advances forced Nazi occupiers to flee Auschwitz. 120 Jewish men were taken on death marches, walking and being forced into cramped cattle cars for 7 days without food nor water. Schindler intercepted this march and managed to rescue most of them. Those who were ill immediately received medical treatment, and those who died received a Jewish burial at a Jewish cemetery. After the war, Schindler settled in West Germany. There, he lived out most of his life with his wife, frequently visiting Israel and those he saved. In 1962, a tree was planted in his honor in the Avenue of the Rightous at Yad Vashem. Following his death on October 9, 1974, he was buried by his survivors in the Catholic Cemetery of Jerusalem, with these words engraved on his stone: "The unforgettable rescuer of 1,200 persecuted Jews." He was officially recognized as righteous among the nations on June 24, 1993.
Jan and Antonina owned one of the largest zoos in Warsaw, Poland. World War II would change the course of their lives completely. In September 1939, the Warsaw Zoo was bombed and many of the animals were killed. The animals that did survive were taken by the German military. Jan was able to persuade Lutz Heck, the director of the Berlin Zoological Garden, to use the zoo as a pig breeding facility in order to feed the German military. In order to care for the pigs, he used leftover food from restaurants and garbage from the nearby ghetto. Jan Sabinski was an employee of the Warsaw municipality. This allowed him entry into the Warsaw ghetto, where he could help his friends to the best of his ability. Being friendly to Jews was highly frowned upon. Helping Jews could get you hung in the town square. Jan saw how horrible the conditions were getting, so he and his wife decided to get their Jewish friends and strangers out of the ghetto. Jan and Antonina hid and relocated 300 Jews from Nazi hands. Jan was the mastermind behind it all. He used his public standing to smuggle weapons, build bombs, overthrow trains, and poison meat that was being fed to the Nazis. He gave them a place to sleep in his now unused zoo and precious documents so they could flee the country. Antonina and her son Richard helped these Jewish refugees with food, company, and getting their humanity back. The Jews were hidden in the basement of the Zabinskis' home. The basement was originally used for storing food and supplies for the animals within the zoo. Since there was no electricity in the basement, it was very cold, dark, and wet. People would stay for days, weeks, months. and even a few stayed for a couple years. Since the zoo is being used for pig breeding and as an armory, German soldiers would patrol it frequently. When they were in the home, Antonina would go to the piano and play La Belle Helene to warn the Jews to hide. In the basement, there was a small opening to a tunnel that led to an enclosure for birds. When the time came for the Jews to hide, they would climb into the tunnel, then Richard would close it behind them and move the wardrobe back in front of it. When the coast was clear, she would play another song by Chopin. This is how the Jews survived, like animals in cages. The person who stayed the longest at the Warsaw Zoo was Magdalena Gross. She stayed hidden from the Germans for 3 years with the help of the Zabinskis. She was a friend of the Zabinskis before the war. She was a sculptor before and during the war. During her stay, she continued to sculpt animals. Her tools and some of her work can be seen at the Zabinskis' home today. Jan fought in the Polish underground. He was eventually caught and captured by the Gestapo in 1944 during the Warsaw Uprising. At this time, Antonina and Richard took over Jan's role. Antonina had first-hand experience with war after her parents died in the Russian Revolution. She was a lover of animals and all living things. This is why she wanted to help the Jews. After the war, Jan returned home from the prison camp and later wrote 60 science books. Jan was an atheist and didn't care about religion. He was taught at a young age to be kind and do the right thing. In 1968, he and his wife were awarded Rightous among nations by the State of Israel. There was a tree planted for them at Yad Vashem on October 30th, 1968.
As the Allied troops further advanced into Nazi-occupied territory, the smell of Nazi defeat was near. However, this did not halt the gruesome killing of victims. Death marches became a new tactic for the Nazis, a way to get rid of their prisoners and prevent them from being liberated by the Allies. Over 250,000 victims were killed by these marches, from starvation, hypothermia, disease, or by the hands of Nazi soldiers that yearned for blood. These marches ended shortly after the entirety of Poland was liberated by the Soviet Red Army. On May 8, 1945, World War II was over. Tragically, Holocaust denialism continued past 1945. 6 million Jews murdered, almost 2 million of them were children, and only a little over 30,000 non-Jews earned the recognition of righteous among the nations. The valiant and courageous acts of Oskar Schindler and Jan and Antonina Zabinski were a rarity during this time of pain and suffering. It was fear, indifference, resentment, and ignorance that aided the Nazis to achieve a number of this magnitude. Thousands of people across the globe are currently suffering at the hands of injustice, yet a majority of us are unaware or actively choose not to help. I call on all of us, the minority, the majority, young or old, far or near, to take action. We must all learn and listen to the stories of the righteous among the nations. We must take to heart that all human beings are worthy and deserving of humanity, and it is our duty to preserve that humanity and cherish it. For if you do not help your fellow neighbor when they are targeted for their ethnicity, religion, culture, language, or simply their existence, then who will save you when you are next? Take my hand and I will take yours. Bear witness with me and remember with me. We shall never forget these atrocities for as long as we protect humanity and love for all. Remember and never forget.